So a lot of people have been asking me about leadership and decision making in the Bruderhof and kind of how it works here. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about that. So first off, I think we all can agree that if we didn't have leaders, things would be pretty chaotic. Before Jesus ascended to heaven, he appointed Peter as the head of his church. And in the first years of Christianity, the role of leadership in the church was very important and is something that is reflected in many teachings from that time. And it's pretty obvious that any group of people, like we are at the Bruderhof, needs people who can take on the main responsibility. Otherwise, we'd all be veering off in like 100 different directions. So the most important thing about leadership at the Bruderhof is that it's a service, and actually we call the ministry the service of the word. Again, it's in accordance with what Jesus said about servant leadership. Leadership in this sense can't be separated from pastoral care, and by that I mean care for souls and the inner well-being of people. It's definitely not a position that's higher, like a hierarchy, like more important than anyone else's. And it's really just about serving and caring for people, often in a pretty down-to-earth way. And this also, again, goes back to the appointment of Peter, where Jesus asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And then Jesus commanded Peter to feed my sheep. So on each of our large communities, like here at the Mount where I live, there are 3 or 4 people who have been asked to take on pastoral leadership. So usually someone is suggested on like a trial basis, and then there's a time of discernment. So that can last from several months, if not longer. And it's not necessarily the person who can talk well or is especially gifted or even someone who's had a seminary training, but it's simply someone who is ready to rely on the Holy Spirit for guidance in everything. And it's that person is willing to care for people in a humble way. We don't have women as ministers, but married couples work very closely together. So on each of our larger communities, there are a few couples who work together as a team to care for people who are living there. So I would say there are 2 sort of main aspects, and they're actually really connected. But it may help me explain this a little bit better if I split them out. So the first one is the practical aspect, and you may not think that that would have anything to do with pastoral care, but it absolutely does. There are so many little practical things on each community that need to come together in one place, and part of the job is making sure that it happens in such a way that people are cared for. So decisions about where a family lives, or in which apartment, or who should work where, or what time we get together for the next members meeting, and so on. There's a team of people that I mentioned earlier that are responsible for working out the practical decisions with input and agreement from the rest of us, of course. So for example, Chris and I, when we were first married, we were living next to an older couple, and the wife had terminal cancer. And the best way to care for her at home was to have their daughter's family move in next door to support with her care, but also to be right there to comfort and encourage her in her final months. And of course, then having her grandchildren running around definitely helped as well. So Chris and I moved out in order, and we've got a new apartment so that the daughter could be close to her mother. So that's one example of pastoral care and where it has very practical hands and feet. Another example along these lines is finding a workplace for each person so that they can be fulfilled. And when a person becomes a member, they promise to serve wherever they're asked to, but in turn, we want each person to be valued and able to contribute as best they can so that their talents or whatever are used. And that often takes time and effort to figure out. I should say here that pastoral leadership obviously doesn't get involved with every little decision in our communities, and that different people take on different leadership responsibility for practical areas. So much like in the book of Acts, where they appointed deacons to handle practical aspects for the apostles. So I'm trying to think of an example here. The people who have been asked to run our furniture business, they make the business decisions, and the chefs in the kitchen, they decide what to cook. So these different people will be assigned those tasks based on their skills and experience. But everyone who is responsible for a workplace, like the business or the kitchen, has also taken on that responsibility as a service on behalf of all of us. And we all try to work together so that everyone is cared for and that the work gets done. Okay, so the other responsibility of leadership, and I think this is the most important one, is the care for the soul of each person, so the pastoral care. Now, that does often go together with the practical aspects that I just mentioned, but it also means listening to people and guiding and counseling each person who needs help in some way. And what's important here is that there's a relationship of trust, and that we can rest assured that whatever problem we have will be listened to in confidence. And even if there isn't a simple answer, which often there isn't, we'll know that we've shared it with someone. And I just want to emphasize that this aspect of pastoral leadership is the most important, and it's the most precious to me, because there's something amazing about being able to share my joys and my struggles with another person whom I trust. And there's something that's just really freeing about that. Like, you almost can't really even describe it in words. Okay, so back to the whole leadership and decision-making stuff. So we also get together for members meetings, at least once a week, if not more. And those gatherings are usually, but not always, led by someone in pastoral leadership. And it's a chance for all of us to think about what's important, and for people to share what they're thinking about or struggling with or rejoicing about. It's also to read from the Gospels, very important, and just to encourage each other. We also do a lot of singing at these meetings, which I really love. Always lifts your heart upwards. And it's also where the decisions it's also where the decisions are made, which leads me to the second part of this video, where I'm going to be talking about how that happens. Recently in the comment section, someone asked me to talk about how the decisions are made and whether or not the Bruderhof is a democracy. And I kind of had to laugh when I read that question, because the word democracy really has nothing to do with Christianity, but it also reminds me of participation in government in high school, a class that I really did not do well in at all. Anyway, the short answer back to is the Bruderhof a democracy is no. And if you think about it, what I said about the beginning of the leadership in the church, no church is a democracy. And now I should probably give a longer answer to explain myself, so here goes. When we come to a decision in our community, it's the result of prayer and the leading of the Holy Spirit. I believe that if all of us are listening to the Spirit of God and wanting to truly be led by Him, we'll all hear the same thing, whether it's a practical decision or a spiritual one, or whether it's the right moment to come to the Lord's Supper, which we do at times when our church especially needs to gather and pray. If even one person doesn't agree, they can and they should say so. One great line that I like, or one great, phrase is, unity is not uniformity. There has to be that freedom for people to speak their minds, especially in matters of conscience. But that being said, if everybody voiced their own opinion each time we needed to make a decision, I don't think we'd ever get anywhere. So what's important is listening to God's leading, and that only happens when we're not pushing our own way. So all this is only possible because we share the same faith and commitment, so that creates a really strong basis for finding unity in practical decision making. It also might happen that we're not able to come to a clear decision on something right away, and when that's the case, we'll hold off until everyone feels the same, and that may take a while. So we also have to learn patience. But for anyone who wants to read more about this, there's a document called The Foundations of Our Faith and Calling, which lays out our beliefs and our way of life. And it has a section on leadership, and decision making, and I will have it linked below. So you should definitely have a look at that document. It's really good, and it's helped me a lot too. So I don't think I have anything else to say about this, and I hope that this video manages to answer all your questions on this topic, and I'll see you next time.